The clock struck 9, and the cafe was nearly empty. Sarah wiped down the last table, humming softly to fill the silence. The rain outside had turned the city into a blur of reflections. She was about to turn the sign to closed when the door chimed. A tall man in a dark coat stepped in, droplets glistening on his shoulders. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long. "One last coffee," he said, his deep voice breaking the quiet. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the clock again, but something in his gaze made her nod. She switched the coffee machine back on, pretending not to notice how he watched her with quiet curiosity, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the cafe. The rain outside tapped against the glass, rhythmic and lonely, like the city itself had fallen asleep. Sarah sighed as she wiped down the counter for the 5th time, her apron already dusted with flour and faint coffee stains. It had been a slow evening, just a few customers grabbing late lattes before disappearing into the wet night. She glanced at the clock above the espresso machine. 9:03 p.m. Her shift ended at 9, but she didn't mind staying a few minutes longer. The cafe was her quiet place, a world away from her cluttered apartment and the noise of her thoughts. She flipped the sign on the door from open to closed and reached for the light switch, when the bell above the door jingled softly. Sarah froze. A man stepped in from the rain, tall and broad-shouldered, his black overcoat glistening with droplets. His hair was slightly tousled, as though the wind had been unkind. There was something commanding about him, though not in a loud way, more like the world tended to pause when he entered a room. "I'm sorry," she began automatically, tightening her grip on the cloth. "We're just about to close." He paused near the counter, his gaze sweeping over the empty tables, the soft golden lights, and finally settling on her. His voice, low and gravelly, carried exhaustion and something else, loneliness. "Just one last coffee," he said quietly. "If it's not too much trouble." Something in his tone stopped her from refusing. The words weren't just a request, they sounded like a plea. She hesitated, then exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right, one last coffee." The man smiled faintly, barely there, but it softened the hard lines around his mouth. He took a seat near the window, where the city lights shimmered through the rain. Sarah started the espresso machine again, its familiar hiss filling the silence. As she worked, she caught him glancing her way, eyes distant, like he wasn't really seeing her but someone from a memory he couldn't let go of. When the coffee was ready, she set the mug before him. Steam curled into the air, carrying the comforting scent of roasted beans and warmth. He murmured, "Thank you," his fingers brushing the cup as though savoring its heat, and for a moment, in the quiet hum of rain and coffee, two strangers weren't so alone anymore. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small cafe, wrapping around them like a gentle blanket against the cold drizzle outside. Sarah placed the steaming mug in front of the stranger, the porcelain clinking softly against the wooden table. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he stared into the swirling steam as though searching for answers there. She watched him quietly for a moment. His suit was finely tailored, though his tie hung slightly loose, and his cufflinks were missing. His hair, dark, neatly trimmed, was damp from the rain, but what caught her attention most were his eyes. They were weary, shadowed by something deeper than just a long day. "Long night?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. He let out a quiet chuckle, low, rough, and tired. "More like a long year," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "Or maybe two." Sarah smiled faintly, folding her arms. "I get that. Some years just refuse to end." He finally lifted the mug, taking a slow sip. The warmth seemed to reach him, softening the hard tension in his shoulders. "My son says I work too much," he said suddenly, almost to himself. "He's 6. Thinks I can fix anything, except showing up for bedtime." There was a small, self-deprecating smile on his lips, but Sarah could hear the guilt beneath it. She tilted her head, her tone gentle. "Kids don't need much fixing, you know. Just a bit of time, and maybe a pancake breakfast." That made him look up, really look at her this time. His eyes, dark, thoughtful, held hers with quiet curiosity. "You sound like someone who's good at listening." Or maybe just someone who's good at talking to strangers, she teased lightly, but her heart fluttered unexpectedly. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. The kind of smile that hinted at who he might have been before the world wore him down. Then maybe, he said softly, I should order a second cup, keep the conversation going. Sarah laughed, the sound warm in the empty cafe. Careful, I might hold you to that. He looked down at his cup, then back at her. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, he murmured, and for the first time all evening, the cafe didn't feel empty at all. The clock above the counter ticked past 10, yet neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. The rain had softened to a drizzle, painting silver streaks on the windows, and the cafe glowed in the golden warmth of the hanging lights. Sarah leaned slightly on the counter, her hands wrapped around her own cup now, while the stranger, Daniel, as he'd finally introduced himself, sat across from her at the corner table, his tie abandoned beside his cup. He spoke quietly, his voice steady but touched with fatigue. I took over the company after my father passed. Everyone said I was lucky, CEO before 35. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Lucky, I guess they didn't see the cost. Sarah tilted her head, her eyes soft. What cost? He hesitated. His fingers traced the rim of his mug, eyes focused somewhere far away. My wife, Claire, she passed 4 years ago. Car accident. Since then, it's just been me and Liam, my son. He's 6 now, brilliant, stubborn, and too much like me for his own good. Sarah's heart ached at the quiet pain in his tone. The confident, polished man before her suddenly seemed vulnerable, human. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, letting the silence carry his words. I keep thinking I'm doing enough, Daniel continued. Running the company, providing for him. But when I come home and he's already asleep, I realize I'm missing everything that matters. Sarah gave a small, understanding nod. Sometimes providing isn't the same as being there, she said softly. But the fact that you see that means something. He looked at her then, really looked, as though no one had told him that before. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. You're not just a barista, are you? She laughed quietly, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. No, I just like coffee and quiet places. And people who forget how to breathe until someone listens. Daniel smiled, leaning back in his chair. The heaviness in his shoulders seemed lighter now, the exhaustion dimmed. Then I think I came to the right cafe tonight. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist. Inside, the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, filled with unspoken understanding and the faint hum of something new beginning. The clock neared 11 when Daniel finally glanced at his watch. The cafe had grown still again, the city outside dimming under a veil of drizzle. The soft rain tapped against the glass, and the faint jazz playing from the speaker had long since turned into background comfort. Daniel sighed quietly and set his empty cup down. I should go, he murmured, his tone reluctant. The warmth that had grown between them lingered in the air, fragile but real. Sarah stood behind the counter, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her apron, unsure what to say. For the first time in a long while, she didn't want the night to end. He rose slowly, sliding his coat back on. The sharp scent of rain and cologne drifted faintly through the space. Thank you, he said, meeting her eyes. For the coffee. For listening. Sarah smiled gently. Anytime. The cafe's always open for good coffee and late-night confessions. That drew a soft chuckle from him, one that made the shadows around his face seem lighter. Then I'll have to come back, he said. His eyes held hers for a moment longer, and in that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between them, something that neither wanted to name too soon. He hesitated near the door, his hand on the handle. The bell jingled softly as he turned back once more. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Daniel, she replied, her voice softer than she meant it to be. When the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier, not empty, but full of something new. She turned back to the tables to tidy up and noticed one cup left behind. The mug sat where he'd been sitting, still half full, the surface rippling from the faint vibrations of the rain outside. Beside it, on a napkin, was a note in neat handwriting. Best coffee I've had in a long time. Maybe I'll come back tomorrow. Daniel. Sarah read it twice, then smiled, a slow warmth blooming in her chest. She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket as though it were something precious. Outside, the rain had thinned to a drizzle, and the city lights shimmered faintly on the wet pavement. She turned the sign on the door once more, "From closed to see you tomorrow," and whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow won't be so lonely after all."